Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this rainy day to have forum with us. It's good to see a lot of you back again. We have a very interesting talk for you today, but before we introduce today's speaker, I'll just go over a few other things that are coming up, a few announcements, and we have a lot more programming planned for you over the month of February and March. So next Sunday, we have a speaker named David Paul, and he comes to us, I believe, from the Answer Coalition, and he will be talking about the imperial aggression, really, is what it is, on the country of Venezuela, the unlawful abduction of their chief of state, and learning more about that. The Sunday after that, 2 weeks from today, we won't have a forum. That's March 1st, but on the 8th of March, which is National Women's Day, I believe we're going to have a programming put on by the women's rights group of the church. I have my notes here is that Mwanza Faraha will be making a tribute to Maya Angelou. So hopefully that will come together for the 8th of March. And then on the 15th of March, we will have our own Anne Rovere, who usually sits in the front row for forum. She is going to tell us about a trip she took to West Africa last summer. So she went on a trip that The Nation magazine puts on. I think it was their first time doing it. I went on one of their other trips that was educational about the civil rights movement. It was through the southern U.S. states. They have several of these trips that are investigating different aspects of the tragedy of slavery in the Americas. And this one goes back to Africa, where the people were abducted and enslaved and brought over here. So that should be a very interesting talk, right? That'll be on the 15th of March. And then on the 22nd, we will have Supervisor Cheyenne Chen from the Excelsior. I think that's the part of the city she represents. She'll be our third supervisor speaking on this podium this year. So that will be more like local issues, okay? We'll have Cheyenne Chen on the 22nd of March. And then on the 29th of March, I've just learned about this amazing presentation that our own Meg Whitaker will be doing. She's going to educate us about a very famous and important civil rights attorney named Anne Fagan Ginger, who passed at the age of 100 last July. And Meg was just telling me about the amazing things she accomplished in her life, and so we'll be learning about that as a part of Women's Day. And then it'll be April, which is Earth Day month, and so we'll be having programming that relates more to the environment and the climate crisis and things like that. So, in case anyone is new here, just the way we do Q&A is these cards that you'll find on the tables and the chairs. Please write your questions, and then we'll ask them of our speaker when we switch to Q&A at around 15 after the hour. And with that, I'd like to invite Adam to come up and do our Ohlone land recognition and to introduce our speaker. Adam?
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, all. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome, perfect. We, the members of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, acknowledge that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who inhabited what is now the San Francisco Peninsula. Anthropologists say that these indigenous communities lived and moved through this area for over 10,000 years. As the original stewards of this land, the Ohlone and other indigenous peoples understand the interconnectedness of all things and maintained harmony with all of nature for millennia. We honor them now for their enduring commitment to our Mother Earth. And now I will introduce our speaker for today. Bismah Jaffer was born and raised in the Bay Area and is now pursuing her dream of being of service to the marginalized communities here. She graduated from SJSU in political science and a minor in human rights. Then she went straight to UCSF Law, then Hastings. From there, she worked as an attorney for small business owners in the Bay Area post-COVID economy at Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. And now she's thrilled to use and develop her legal skills to assist the communities that trust CAIR SFBA to fight for their rights. With honor and pleasure, I'd like to introduce to the mic Bismah Jaffer.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. My name is Bismah Jaffer, and I'm a civil rights attorney at CAIR SFBA. If we can go to the next slide. Before I get started, I do have to talk about CAIR a little bit. We stand for Council on American Islamic Relations. The mission is to enhance understanding of Islam, encourage dialogue, protect civil rights, and empower American Muslims. We want to be the leading advocate for justice and mutual understanding, and we provide direct legal services in civil rights and immigrant rights. You don't have to be Muslim to get the immigrant rights. And then advancing policy and advocacy, programs and education, engaging with the media. And then the San Francisco Bay Area office is in Santa Clara. It's a little misleading, but it is the oldest office in the country, the oldest CAIR office. And then if we move on to the next slide, I am an attorney, so I do have to give a legal disclaimer that I'm not your attorney. Anything I tell you is not advice, and if you want to act on anything I've said today, please consult an attorney. We can move on to the next slide. So it's a little cut off, but it says tools cannot dismantle the master's house. The master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. That's part of the title of today's discussion, Can Liberation Be Lawful? Dismantling the House. And that comes from a quote by Audre Lorde. She was a Black feminist poet, and she went to a conference, a feminist conference. She was one of 2 Black women at that conference, and so she spoke about the patriarchy and how you can't examine the patriarchy using the tools of the patriarchy. You can't question the patriarchy when you're looking at the fruits of the patriarchy. So if we zoom out a little bit, we can see that that point remains the same when we're talking about the need for liberation. We can't use the oppressor's tools to get us out of oppression. The master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. If we move on to the next slide. So, our master's tools are scary. They're detention centers, they're solitary confinement, they're military armed tanks. They're everything we see here and in the news for the past, since America was founded or colonized. Our tools are boycotting Amazon, and then with those dollars we save, they go to our taxes that fund a genocide. Taxes that if we don't pay, we face prison time. The tools are very scary. Our tools are all these scary things, and our house is oppression and occupation. So what can we do if we can't use the master's tools? Because we do need some tools. I think that it's hard, right? I think even if everyone in this room was multiplied, 1,000-fold, it'd still be scary if a fascist with a gun is looking at you in the face, right? If you're driving home, we know that that's not safe if you accidentally drive into a protest. It's very scary. And so how do we go from here? How do we liberate ourselves? And liberation means to free yourself from oppression, occupation, to free a country. And I am an attorney. I am the master's tool. I studied the law and I practice it, and I am within that framework. I have to do all my organizing efforts to liberate. And part of that is that I specifically took an oath to uphold the Constitution. And the Constitution was drafted by enslavers, oppressors, and I have to stand by the Constitution. It's not just words, it's the beating heart of the United States government. It's a living document. And so, with that being said, I took an oath, and I am a woman of my word. I am not breaking the oath. How can I talk about liberation? How can I talk about that when I'm binded by oppressors and their words and their documents and their laws? I'm binded to follow all federal, state, and local laws. I think as a civil rights attorney, I do have my role in liberation, as everyone has their roles. And mine is to study and examine the laws and teach them to people. And then so you have the knowledge of how these tools have worked. and so that you can go on with that knowledge, not the laws, but the knowledge of them, to do whatever it is that your role is in liberation. So can liberation be lawful? I think history has the answers. So if we move on to the next slide, we can start with the American Revolution, right? Those colonies, in a sense, liberated themselves from the British. It was in the 1700s, and how did they do it? How did they liberate themselves? Why did they liberate themselves? Because, well, we all know they taxed the teas, but more than that, the British were taxing these colonies to use that money to pay off their own debts. And they also didn't allow self-governance, which essentially is liberation. And so those colonies had resistance groups, or I think in today's language, we would call them armed resistance groups. They called them militias, but now we would call them armed resistance groups. And they had the French helping them. They had foreign aid, international alliances. That wasn't legal. That act of liberation, those multiple acts of liberation, were not legal, yet here we are made to celebrate the 4th of July. So in this case, no, it wasn't legal. And if we stick with the U.S., and for conversation's sake, we say that the expansion of the U.S. was also part of their liberation. So what does that mean for the people who happened to be here before the colonies? If we move on to the next slide, well, the U.S. entered into treaties, and a treaty is equivalent to the Constitution in that they are both referred to as the law of the land. It's backed by the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution, and treaties are regarded as equivalent to an act of legislature. They are recognized in international law. And so the U.S. entered into these very legally binding contracts, these treaties. If we move on to the next slide, this is a sentence that was at the end of a few treaties that the U.S. entered in with some different tribes. And in total, there was over 360 treaties with American indigenous tribes. And they had to respect them, right? There's indigenous people all over, and they have all their land, right? No, because the U.S. didn't respect the treaties. They broke those treaties. If we look at the first official treaty at the next slide, it was with the Lenape Nation. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but they had this treaty where the U.S. would maintain friendship and they would be in alliance with the Lenape Nation against British occupation. And then immediately after, Pennsylvania militiamen killed 100 Lenape women and children at a village. And now we have Delaware. And the same things happened with a bunch of other tribes, for instance, Cherokee and Choctaw. So in this case, the liberation was not legal. But there are instances where the legal system was used to free some individuals or in some capacity. If we move on to the next slide. So post-Civil War, we had the first amendments that we've had since 60 years before, and that was the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, but not really if you're in prison, or detention centers. And then Amendment 14, the Equal Protection Clause, and 15, the right to vote. So, yay, 1865, we have all these things. They should be implemented. But if we go to the next slide, we see that the Equal Protection Clause was not implemented until nearly 100 years later. If we move on to the Civil Rights Movement, which had varying tactics to get to where we are today, to get those civil rights. We have the Montgomery bus boycott. Very famous, Rosa Parks, refused to give up her seat. It was a movement lawyering tactic. She was doing something illegal in the act of liberation. She was challenging a law that she didn't think was right, that most people didn't think was right. Well, I wouldn't say most, but some people, enough people. So she was challenging a law, and so she was doing something illegal. And then we have, in 1954, Brown v. Board of Education. Before this case, there were segregated schools. And because of that, the 14th Amendment wasn't being used. There was no equal protection. And so if we move on to the next slide, we can see how we used the legal system to get desegregated schools. So it was a win in the court case, but immediately after, what happened was when these schools were desegregated is that the black staff at black schools, the principals, the teachers, were terminated to ensure white leadership. So it caused a lot of harm as well to the black community. And then one of the cases, because it's the Brown v. Board is made up of 5 cases. One of them was pertaining to Barbara Rose Johns, who's here. That's her picture. She was a 16-year-old, and she led a 450-student walkout, completely legal at the time, under the First Amendment. And because it was a success, I'm assuming that's why the First Amendment has some restrictions on students now. So if you wanted to a 450-student walkout, you have to make sure it doesn't disrupt the educational process, which of course it will, because it's a walkout. It's meant to disrupt things. And those kids would be charged with unexcused absences. And 100 years between those amendments and Brown v. Board of Education went by. So who knows how long a walkout's going to take? How many kids can spare that many unexcused absences? So even when we work within the legal frame, we could win the case, and we see how if the tactic wins and it's legal, that tactic is no longer allowed in the future. We can move on to the next slide. Here is something else that was used by the Black Panther Party. They're so cool to me. They had the free breakfast program, which super legal. You know, there was systemic neglect for black children in schools. They weren't provided nutrition, let alone, education. And how are you going to learn if you're hungry? So the Black Panther Party had a breakfast program where these children received free food. That is not illegal. That's not illegal. It's super legal and a great thing to do. So you would assume that, the U.S. would have no problem. But if you move on to the next slide, our FBI director at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, called this breakfast program, saying that it represents the best and most influential activity, and as such is potentially the greatest threat to efforts by authorities to neutralize the Black Panther Party and destroy what it stands for. This is about feeding children for free. So, again, you can do the legal things and then you're going to be targeted for it. Not only did he say these things, but he had police and FBI raid the children as they ate that breakfast. They spread rumors that the breakfast was poison. They did everything they could to stop this very lovely free program for children. And then moving on, there's also another thing that the Black Panthers did that was completely legal. Probably one of the most famous things they did was police the police. California actually was a state with open carry, loaded firearms. Second Amendment right. And so the Black Panthers very legally would carry their rifles and show up with their rifles where it was legally allowed. And then in 1967, because what they were doing was working and it was scaring the police so that they wouldn't kill black people anymore, a statute passed that prohibited public carrying of loaded firearms without a permit, and that permit is not easy to get. And the purpose of that was not gun control, it was not gun safety, it was to criminalize the very legal actions the Black Panthers were taking to liberate themselves. And it's funny because Republicans, Democrats, and the NRA supported this. But when kids get shot at school now, the NRA does not support gun control. So just something to note. And it's not just America. If we take it international, we see that even other countries make it illegal to liberate yourselves, right? We know what the Holocaust was. It was a genocide, and it was illegal to advocate for Jewish people. It was illegal to denounce Nazism. The White Rose was a group of students who spread leaflets and denounced Nazism and advocated for Jewish people. It was illegal, but they were nonviolent. They were executed. So okay, that's awful. But to summarize, we have criminalizing legal actions, and then the oppressor themselves committing legal acts and being hypocrites, right? We have the American Revolution, which was formed by militias and foreign aid. We have broken treaties, which are the law of the land. We have the Holocaust and the non-violent illegal resistance groups. We have gun control laws in response to legal activism. Brown v. Board has limited First Amendment rights and a mass termination at that time of black educators. And a free children's program was raided by the FBI and the police. So if we see what's happening today, onto the next slide, we can see how this is happening still. And so if you want to act legally, do so. You know, I'm a lawyer, I'm going to tell you to. But let's see how this is playing into effect today. If we move on to the next slide. So Minnesota is one of the states that does have open carry law. And everything that's going on in Minneapolis and all around, even in Ohio, ICE agents are toting around with their guns, and it's scary, and so people in response are carrying their guns. Maybe not even in response, maybe they just like their guns. Donald Trump lies, like he does, because he's a liar, and says that Minnesotans can't do that. They can't carry guns and go to protests. The Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus wrote that that's completely incorrect. You can carry loaded guns into a protest. That's Minnesota law. That's your Second Amendment. So that's another thing that they're doing. They're lazier now, and they're not going to criminalize gun law. They're just going to cause chaos and confusion. So knowing your rights here is very important, right? And you know, there's the right to stay silent, there's the right to your attorney, but there's deeper rights than that, and you have to get creative in liberation. If we move on to the next slide, even when we do act within the law, and California passes a statute, passes a bill that's the No Secret Police Act, which basically says that ICE agents, federal officers, cannot hide their face here in California. They can't wear masks. That's lovely, right? If you see a group of masked men taking you away, you call the police. That's kidnapping. You know, it's not federal agents working. But Judge Snyder, all caps, so you know who he is, ICE agents are allowed to perform their duties without wearing a mask because you're treating federal and state officers different, and it violates the Supremacy Clause, which is funny because, again, when the Black Panther Party were policing the police and the Mulford Act was passed, the governor, Ronald Reagan, said that there was no reason why on the street today a citizen should be carrying a loaded weapon, and that guns were a ridiculous way to solve problems. It's just the hypocrisy. If we move on to the next slide. Again, the resisting genocide policies. They make it illegal to advocate for people who are being ethnically cleansed. 1935, Germany had this in their law, where Nazis enforced their agenda with terror and propaganda by categorizing Jewish people as enemies of the regime, thus targeting them for brutal persecution. And then 2005, in Israel, there was a law that Israel, the IDF, the IOF, is not responsible to injuries onto persons who are not citizens or residents of Israel and are residents of a territory outside Israel that has been declared an enemy state, which is occupied Palestine. So if you want to liberate people who are victims of genocide, you would be breaking the law there. If we move on to the next slide, we can see how even international ties are keeping us from being liberated. And the master's tools are just getting stronger. The IDF and the US have a relationship, very obviously. New York Police Department has a counterterrorism office in Israel Police Headquarters. The US sends agents, police officers, Border Patrol on trips to Israel for training and exchange programs run by the IDF and private firms by the US. The US agencies are importing tactics that have been held to violate civil rights. So if we move on to the next slide, what does this mean for Muslims? What is CAIR seeing right now? And you know, it's no secret that Middle Eastern countries have had a long history of struggling for liberation, and those countries have large Muslim populations. And we also know that there is centuries-old stereotyping and villainizing of Muslims. And so whenever Muslims do any act of liberation, it will always be seen as a viewpoint of evil, violent, and an attack on democracy. You know, we're asked certain questions. Do you condemn, ... is what that says. We're already set up in a trap. Our intentions are already decided for us. And how can we use the master's tools that proliferate and create these problems to dismantle the problems? And so, moving on, we can see even just the Bay Area and how this is affecting people. Stanford 11, they were pro-Palestinian students. They were demonstrators who barricaded themselves in the president's office and caused minor damage to property, not people, because that's usually what happens sometimes in mass protests, is that property gets damaged. The people don't get killed until the police get involved. But we love property. That's the basis of US law. And so they were charged for criminal offenses. And it's obviously a message, a targeted message, to say if you stick up for something, you will be criminalized and then disenfranchised. So we have to be as creative as they're being. That's the point there. If we move on to the next slide, just to, again, reiterate what we do at CAIR SFBA is provide legal services to teachers who have been repressed from teaching about current major international events, students penalized for nonviolent resistance against genocide in Palestine, employees terminated for exercising their First Amendment rights, and a whole host of other things. And so, next slide. I say this all to say the tools cannot dismantle the master's house. We've seen that in history. I've given a short overview. So can liberation be lawful? Well, when we make it lawful, they make it illegal. So yes and no. And, you know, have all this knowledge for your own roles in whatever movements and organizing you choose to do. I advocate for following the laws and following the Constitution, as is my oath. But, you know, history is history. We can't deny that. And so thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Bismah, for that great presentation. We have a couple questions so far. Could you comment on the Texas Governor Abbott's threat to have the state take over schools where students protest ICE by walking out? I guess from a legal perspective and
yeah, every state has different laws. I mean, we're all afforded like the rules that come from the Constitution and federal laws, but then the states have their own areas where they can decide what the rules are. But again, historically, we've seen that students lead the charge in a lot of these things, right? I was talking to a man earlier in the crowd, I don't know where he is, but he was talking about how young people are the activists, and they're going to be the future leaders. So, I mean, why listen to Governor Abbott?
Similarly to that, all these deportations of people who have been protesting against the genocide in Gaza, those seem like patently illegal acts of the state. I guess we support them doing that. We want people to do that. We have to work within the legal system, I guess, to try to stop that, right? What other choice do we have?
We all have our choices, but yeah, if you follow the law. The thing about ICE agents and police officers and even our president is that they don't know the law, and they're just dumb. So if you know the law and you know it well and you just state it in front of them with the confidence and the support of the people around you, a lot of the times they might just leave you alone. They might get intimidated. So yeah, the law can help in some ways, and the knowledge of the law is the most important part.
Does CAIR have any plans for organizing opposition to ICE concentration camps?
I think in spirit, yes. In terms of like actual projects, we do direct legal services for immigrant rights, and when it comes to these bigger things, we do media and advocacy. We have press releases. That's our strongest tool that we have, just given the branding that CAIR has and that people look to it for information.
Could you list the local universities which charged Palestinian protesters and how they ruled, like talking about Stanford, UCSF, USF, and SF State?
I don't know specifics, but this is a really good question because we just came out with our hostile campus report. So we investigated 51 campuses. We have like a rubric system where these campuses are given 100% unhostile in the beginning. And then we deduct points based on how they treat their students, based on what the free speech is like on that campus and what the students are saying. And all 51 campuses are either hostile or under watch, where they're making inconsistent and harmful policies. The report should be online, but it names those universities, it names the methodology, and it shows you the points. So if you're interested in seeing what universities are doing, I would point you to that hostile campus report.
Thank you. I don't believe we have any other questions, but this has been super informative.
I think they have.
We have another one? Okay. Our tax money is funding the genocide. Is there any legal way to avoid that? Do we as taxpayers have any choices so that we aren't complicit in this?
I wish I knew. Like I said, we have to pay our taxes. I wish I knew. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
So you spoke about how so many people, going back to the American Revolution, were acting outside the legal framework to do what was seen or understood as being just. So many examples you gave us, right? We would like to hear what you see are ways outside the master's house for achieving what we believe is right and just. With the caveat that you're an attorney and cannot say.
Talk to me after. Yeah.
Off the record, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much. Oh, Anne. Someone commented that there are hundreds of lawsuits against this administration. Our own AG, Bonta, I believe is his name, has been prolific in suing the administration. Maybe you'd like to talk about what we think the prospects for that are. I mean, we have the Ninth Circuit Court, and the Supreme Court seems to be stacked against us more and more these days.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar about the specifics of that case. Even if the decision did go our way, seeing that implemented is very different. Like we saw with the amendments and how long it took to see that through. I don't mean to be a downer. The better we know the reality, the better motivated we can be to change the future.
On this week's Real Time with Bill Mayer, General McMaster said that the numbers were confirmed. 30,000 or more Iranian protesters killed by the government in 48 hours. Why is no one talking about this?
Iran has a history of different kinds of leadership. I think we know that with U.S. intervention, historically, that doesn't help other countries. Our motives are never great. So, I think as Americans, we just have to educate ourselves. I know a lot of people think, oh, the Middle East, it's so complicated. I don't know where to get started. the children in the Middle East understand what's going on because they have no choice. So I think a lot of people aren't talking about it because they're scared to have the wrong opinion about Iran. They're scared maybe to question the Shah. Maybe they're scared to question Trump. But if you educate yourselves, you'll see that it never is either or sometimes.
Do you feel the tide is changing in the U.S. legal system, or in the U.S. it says, about support for Palestinians?
I like to think so. I think the more that people have done in activism has changed at least some perception of what's happening, and that it's not. I don't want to say that word, but I think the perception is changing slowly. I think a lot of damage has already been done by those who refused to look into it earlier, but we'll take what we can get.
This church has declared itself to be a sanctuary church. I think there's a long historic precedent for that, and I believe this church might have done that back in the 80s during the Central American wars, if we could call it that. Are we on good legal ground doing that? I mean, I think I've read that they did raid a church in Minnesota.
You have your First Amendment rights, and there's church and state. If there is pushback, I would assume it's not on the strongest legal basis.
We're not on strong legal basis?
No, the pushback would.
The pushback.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have a good chance of challenging that in court.
From what I've heard, yeah, I think so.
Okay. Someone asked, what are our chances of suing our government? I'm not sure exactly what we'd be suing, but...
I mean, that's a big part of movement lawyering, right? Rosa Parks was not the first person to sit somewhere on the bus she wasn't supposed to. But the movement lawyering made it so that she did that, garnered attention, and then they created the Montgomery bus boycott, which lasted over hundreds of days. So that's another thing, is you can sue the government, you can create a situation where you challenge a law through the legal system. You're going to have to do it for more than like a week, though, and I think that's a lot of people's problems with some activism.
I'll get to the Zoom question in just a moment. Coming back to the sanctuary church policy, we fear that ICE might come to our church and try to get in without a warrant. How do you think we could prepare for that?
So legally, ICE can't come in without a judicial warrant. They might serve you an administrative warrant. That is not what they need. They need a judicial warrant signed off by a judge. Knowing ICE, they don't always follow the rules, so they might just barge in. But legally, they can't. So I would say get all the information you can about the ICE agents, their names, their faces, their badge numbers, license plates. And then if they do, worst case scenario, take someone, just in general, it's good to have a safety plan where you have someone's number and they have access to your passport and things like that, and that if someone is being detained, get the number of their emergency contact. There's legal things you can do, right? Like afterwards you can make the complaint and you can sue. But in the moment, how do we save each other? It's having that community backup plan.
Someone on Zoom commented that with all the examples you've given us about how the law has been used to harm and thwart people seeking freedom and justice, what can we do that's within the legal system? Or should we think of going outside the legal system was the subtext of the question? Yeah.
Again, if you look at history, we had Martin Luther King Jr.'s perspective in the beginning, right, of nonviolent civil disobedience. And sometimes that meant challenging the laws and breaking the laws. And then we had, on opposition, the very heavily armed Black Panther Party. And if we look at history, fast forward now to reality, Martin Luther King Jr. is a martyr, even though he was killed by the U.S. government. But he's the person that you look to when you are the government and you want people to peacefully protest. But they had that pressure from the Black Panther Party as well. So I'm not saying to break the law. I'm saying that if you look at history, they did break the law, and then they changed the law, and they had opposing pressure. So the U.S. had to cave into one side or the other. You know, even today, if we kneel peacefully during the anthem, that was a problem. So, you know, just assess your risk tolerance in the decisions you make. That's all anyone can do.
From everything you've said, it seems clear that the laws are fragile, elastic, and readily ignored by those in power. How powerful are our existing civil liberties laws in protecting people who are currently under threat by the U.S. administration? In our struggle against its abuses of power, can we count on the judicial system to protect us?
I think it's one of the tools we can use, right? Again, if we have pressure from multiple points, they're going to have to cave in. So, again, assess your risks, and if you want to movement lawyer and challenge laws, then you can use the legal system in that way. And then, you know, just find your role in this. You know, it can't be a passive role. Just find what works for you.
We have two questions relating to government surveillance, one of digital surveillance and one of like cameras and things. So one question says, can you comment on mass surveillance of protesters and all U.S. citizens, immigrants, etc.? Is there any way of challenging mass surveillance, avoiding surveillance through different technologies? Then the other question is, do you know government can have access to our digital activities on Google, Meta, etc., and collect info on us? Who is challenging this or will challenge this? Border visa reviews and things like that. I think I read recently that someone had attended a protest, and that was all they did, and then they were TSA banned them from boarding a flight, which was very frightening to hear. Anyway.
Yeah, there is scary technology out there that can see what clothes you're wearing and then see where you bought it and then find out who you are. So when you go to protests, you know, wear a mask. If you have tattoos, cover up. Just try your best to be there physically, but you're just going to have to take precaution and find a way to cover yourself up. That's just where we're at.
Do you have any advice on the digital surveillance aspect of that? Like things we can do to protect ourselves?
Yeah, I think some simple things you could do is not use Face ID on your phone. That way, if it's taken from you, the police can't just try to unlock it because they can't ask you for your password, but they can shine it on your face and then get it unlocked. So that's an easy, simple thing you can do. For these private companies that might give their data to the U.S., they're private companies that have the rights to do what they want. You know, Apple chooses to encrypt their things, so it's very difficult for the government to get into phones. Other companies aren't like that. Just learn what the company's policies are, and you know, if you don't participate, then they lose money, and then maybe they'll change their policies.
Several people in the congregation have read Ilan Pape's most recent book, which is titled Israel on the Brink. And we're wondering if you have read or heard about this book. Okay. Well, his thesis is that Zionism has suffered a severe decline, that there is a potential for a new opening for things to change and to go against the goals of the IOF over there. Do you have any opinion about that?
I want to read that book. But yeah, that's good to hear. It's unfortunate that Israel is supported by the U.S. Financially and militaristically. But again, that can all change if the human perception is different, and then we do things to make them not be able to do those things.
Do you see elders who have long lives as the ones who can most afford to take risks rather than younger people who are not yet lived a long life or are in the middle of their careers? I'd like to add a comment to this because I have a relative who became an attorney, and she is Jewish too, and she was active in student for justice in Palestine at UC Berkeley, and she was doxxed and suffered severe consequences from that. I believe it affected her hiring potential and so on. So it's very scary for younger people who want to do the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sacrifice the elderly. But yeah, if that you specifically are an older person and you see that as a role that you can fit, then that's lovely. I mean, for me, I'm a light-skinned woman, so I see my privilege in some ways, and I make use of that. I see my privilege in being able to get a law degree, and I make use of that. So again, it's up to the individual, but we gotta do something.
When you look around the country, can you think of any leaders like Martin Luther King who can lead a revolt against Trump?
No, because I don't think there's just one person, right? I think the leader shows up on accident, right? So once we start doing things a little more progressively, then maybe someone will be the leader, but I don't know right now. It's just politicians.
Thank you. I like that. We can't look to one person to save us from this mess. We have to rise up as collectively and fight it. Okay, our last question is, can you advise about the best way to educate ourselves?
Yeah, the Bay Area is so great in that we have so many different nonprofits and legal services that get funding and can exist, that offer so many different Know Your Rights trainings. CAIR is one of them. We offer Know Your Rights about like just the current climate of things, just a brief overview. We offer Know Your Rights for student protesters or protesters in general. We have a bystander prevention training. So if you want to learn like in your everyday life, if something happens, what you should do. We tailor Know Your Rights to mostly whatever the need is in regards to civil rights or immigrant rights. And there's other organizations who have these things in these toolkits as well.
Do have a couple more questions. So there was a security conference in Europe this week, and AOC, that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, spoke there. A lot of us read about this. And she talked about how corporations seem to be where the agency is in a lot of this. Corporations are moving to affect our lives, so they have more power than governments. What are, I guess, within the legal framework, ways of challenging Google, Facebook, Amazon, etc.?
I think as Americans, just people being in America, it feels like everything is very far away and everything is very difficult. Yeah. But the one thing we can do is use our money or not use our money. You know, we don't need, a bathrobe to be delivered to us at 4 a.m. from Amazon. We don't need these things. Some of the internet we do need, but you just don't shop at these places. Don't spend your money at these places. These corporations are nothing without us. And we've been here without billionaires before, so we can do it again.
So far, San Francisco has been pretty lucky in terms of the ICE dragnet, but we did just yesterday, so the ICE captured a nanny. I heard that she was an elderly woman. She was going to her appointment to take care of some children, and they blocked her car and they arrested her. So I guess the question is like, okay, so someone's provided a phone number that we can all use when we see something like this happening. It's 415-200-1548, and you should contact that number and send photos, like you could text that number. So do you have any comments about strategies, things that we can do when we see these kinds of things happening? Yeah, the phone number for the rapid response is 415-200-1548. 1548, 200-1548.
Jack also just said, blow your whistle.
Yes. We were handing out whistles 2 Sundays ago. I think we should all be carrying those.
Yeah. So one thing as an individual, what you can do, again, is be prepared yourself. Have that emergency contact person that has the access to all your things. And then make sure that other people around you are doing the same so that if they do get detained, they're able to at least tell you who they need you to contact. Because if they have that paperwork, then you contact an attorney, right? Or just contact an attorney anyway. And legally, what we can do is file like a habeas corpus, just something to keep them from moving to a different detention facility, and then other legalese things to get them out. It happens, it's possible. So that's something that you can do to protect yourself and your communities, and that's something legally that attorneys do to help.
Someone brought up AIPAC, that's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, I believe is what it stands for, and their extreme influence on our political process. The money that they're putting into the process is very, very large. And someone said, do we have a list of those? I think those are publicly available on the internet, by the way, Dolores. But I was wondering if you have an opinion about whether, I mean, I have read some people say that they should be registering as an agent of a foreign country. Is there a legal way to challenge AIPAC? Do you think that could be possible? They're acting as agents of a foreign government, aren't they? Is that legal to do?
I don't know. I'd have to look into that because the law is annoying and there's rules and exceptions to the rules and exceptions to the exceptions. But yeah, protesting, boycotting, lobbying, they have very rich lobbyists for them. But if we show up en masse, I mean, what are they, where are the people?
What about AROC? That stands for Arab Resource. What does AROC stand for? Something organizing committee? Yeah. Do they have training or can they give advice to folks who are traveling outside the U.S.?
That's a different organization. I do know that they organize protests and they have case management systems for direct legal services, but I can't speak to other services. You'd have to look at their website.
Okay. And then one more question, camping onto the Elon Pape book. Is Zionism dying?
Yes, I hope so.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bismah. This was
great.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. I'll just wrap up with a couple of announcements. A few people came in after I did these at the beginning. So next Sunday, we have someone speaking about Venezuela and the American aggression against that country. That should be a great talk. Please come next Sunday. And then the Sunday after that, we don't have forum. And on the 8th, we're hoping to have Mwanza Faraha, doing a tribute to Maya Angelou. This is being done in coordination with the women's group. And maybe, Louise, we can speak about that afterwards. And then, after that, we'll have Anne Rovere, who will be giving us a recap of her very interesting trip to West Africa to learn about the part of the slave trade that happened over there, sadly. And she took a tour there last year. So that's something to look forward to. And then, on the 22nd, we'll have Supervisor Cheyenne Chen from the Excelsior coming to speak to us, and that'll be more of a local focus. And then on the 29th, Meg Whitaker is going to talk to us about the amazing life and work of Anne Fagan Ginger, who was a very prominent civil rights attorney who passed away at the age of 100 last year. So looking forward to see you all back on the coming Sundays. Thank you.